Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Words, Images, and Worlds. I am joined on this episode by comics creator, writer, author David Pepose. Welcome, David.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. Excited to have you. I enjoy your work a great deal,
Thank
both
you.
your shared universe, I guess you could call it, or licensed work, as well as
Yeah,
your work that's in your own universe, your own wheelhouse of creating.
yeah,
I
yeah. Thank
appreciate
you.
that you do both. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss both. Yeah, it's funny. I sometimes have to kind of catch myself because you're right. Like there's the licensed work and then there's the creator owned work. Um, but I think that the shared universe is really up here, and
True.
sometimes I have to kind of do a double take and remind myself like, oh no, like not these are not all your toys, but I do get to play with them, and that's always I think the most fun part of the process.
I love that way of talking about it because as a kid, I mean, of course, you and I both, I know from listening to you talk in other contexts, we've both been comics fans for a long time. I was a
Yeah.
comics reader growing up. And so, of course, I would go play with the toys, and of course, I would go make books in response to the books I was reading. But very cool that you get to play. You get to play with some pretty well-known action figures. You have a good
Yeah,
collection.
it's been it's been pretty cool. Especially I mark 2 years at Marvel. I guess it's gonna be the end of next month. So yeah, and I've been very fortunate to play with a lot of really cool toys. And yeah, I think it's just, there's a little bit of intimidation that goes there, that you're
Sure,
just like,
sure.
oh, these are figures that I grew up with, and how do you sort of add to a tapestry that so many talented people have already added to? But I think it all goes back to love. It's sort of like, what do I love about these characters, and what's something that I personally, when I think of these characters, like what's something that makes me feel an emotion, or something that, like, what's the first thing I think of when I think of these characters? And I think you do that, and you kind of know what your writing runway is,
Mm.
so you can kind of tailor your story for that page length. And yeah, so far I think just kind of listening to your heart hasn't steered me wrong yet.
Oh, absolutely. And who better than a fan um,
Yeah,
to treat the characters well and to take them in good directions.
thank you. I'm trying. It's one of those things that ultimately I think there are a lot of directions you can take characters, and I think it ultimately comes down to, like I was saying before, it's just, yeah, does the love shine through? Does the respect shine through?
Hmm.
I think comics readers, they can tend to be a little conservative with their tastes. I
Sure.
think change averse might be the word. Um, but the thing that I always say to myself is, at least in my experience so far, everything I've written, it is finite.
Yeah.
And I find that comics, especially in licensed comics, the big two characters that have a longer shelf life than even I do, um, there's an inertia. Things always kind of come back to status quo eventually. It's
Mm.
very rare that something kind of a change happens forever. I mean, I remember growing up, during Death and Return of Superman, and
Sure. Yeah.
Nightfall, and Electric Blue Superman, and obviously those things don't last. The things that do last, however, is when you introduce new characters, and those are the things that I find to be really additive. People like Superboy and Steel, or Azrael, or Miles Morales, or Spider Gwen. Those are the things that I think the surest way to kind of to add your brick to the house of ideas. And I know in particular that was something I was thinking about when I was pitching Moon Knight, City of the Dead, where
Yeah.
we're going to
Yeah.
be debuting Layla Al Fawley as the all new Scarlet Scarab.
Yeah.
And
Excited about
that was
that.
that was something I really loved about that Disney Plus show, was that was a character who, I think a lot of people started thinking, oh, that's she's basically Marlene Alaroon from the comics. This is just, a different character with the same trajectory. And by making her into a hero, with her own power set and her own origin, suddenly she is additive to the mix. And suddenly there are no rules. It's just purely almost a blank slate that you get to add to. And so that's something I'm having a lot of fun with at Marvel presently, is just how can I kind of add something to the mix? What can I add? What can I bring to the table? And I think as long as you treat those characters with love and respect, and it's apparent, I think fans, by and large, can be forgiving of the twists and turns you make along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was excited to see Moon Knight on the way. That's always been it's been a favorite character of mine. I think the first time I discovered that character was on like one of those Marvel trading cards from the early
Hmm.
90s and just
Yeah,
loved the look and the appeal. So it's great to see that mythology come together in so many ways.
thank you. Moon Knight's a fun one. I think like many readers, the Ellis and Shelby run that the character really like crystallized for me. Oh, what there's a lot that can be done with that character. And I know that run was a big influence on my first creator owned work, Spencer and Locke, which was kind of a psychological thriller wrapped up in a crime noir story. um, I pitched it as what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? And so, about a hard-boiled detective who is essentially hallucinating his best friend and partner, this 7 foot tall imaginary Blue Panther. And that story is very much about mental health. And when it came out, one of the biggest compliments that I got from it was people saying, "Oh, this guy should really write Moon Knight someday." And so yeah, it does. It felt like it came full circle. I know we had talked about Moon Knight briefly in Savage Avengers. He was somebody I had on my wish list, and I had to kind of trim that roster down just because I juggled a lot of characters in that book. And I remember telling my editor Tom Brevoort, I was like, "All right, I had an idea for him in the central roster, had to cut him. Had an idea for him in the second arc, couldn't fit him, had to cut it." I was like, "All right, I really, it breaks my heart to cut him, but I'll do it." And so I think Tom heard that. He asked me to write for Moon Knight, Black, White, and Blood. Um, I had a really fun opportunity to write a story for that with Leonardo Romero. And I think I told Tom, I said, if there's ever any more opportunities, let me know. And I think it was that following summer that Tom hit me up. So I guess it was last summer. That's how long we've been working on this.
Nice,
Uh,
nice. Wow.
this when he hit me up and said, "Hey, do you have any ideas for like a mini series? Moon Knight's having a moment right now." And I said, "Yeah, how about him fighting through the Egyptian underworld with the Scarlet Scarab? How does that sound?" And
Love it.
we're off to the races.
Oh yeah, yeah. And those characters, I mean, there's a mythology there that I love with superheroes in general,
Yeah,
but bringing all that together. And I love the concept-based nature of your work. Even, I mean, it's something like going to the chapel is just
right.
it's fun. It's you've got an original take on it, and I enjoy that about what you bring to
Thank
comics as
you.
well.
Thanks for reading Going to the Chapel. I always feel like that's the book of mine that gets overlooked the most, and I love that book. It's sort of direct market counter programming. For those
Mhm.
who haven't read that book, it's I always pitched it as Die Hard meets Wedding Crashers,
Yes, yeah.
um, or Dog Day Afternoon meets The Runaway Bride. But it is about a rich bride who has a serious case of cold feet on the day of her wedding, and then the chapel is taken over by a gang of bank robbers who we find out is led by her ex-boyfriend. And so she has to kind of figure out where do her loyalties lie at one point, becoming the ringleader of her own hostage situation to try to escape walking down the aisle. um yeah, I have a lot of affection for that series, so thank you for reading it.
Yeah, yeah.
um I, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head as far as the concepts are concerned, because I think especially in this day and age with the industry being, I think we're in a volatile period just with the industry and the economy in general and just entertainment as a concept. And so, I know that I have a specific runway that I'm writing for. And so I try to make every storyline, what's the elevator pitch for it? What's something that can make this story stand on its own 2 feet independently? I'm always trying to think of what's something I can do that can make it evergreen, um, an evergreen story that you can kind of pick up no matter really what's going on in continuity at the moment. And of course, that's much easier for a creator own. But even for my superhero work, I find that uh, I try to do something that, while maybe it's tied to a specific storyline, like my Fantastic Four two-parter, which that was a tie-in for Axe Judgment Day. But even that, like, yes, it is tied to a specific event, but I try to make the story as kind of universal to the characters as possible.
Hmm.
Because my goal is I'd love for you to pick up the story in 5 years and still get some enjoyment out of it, or 10 years and get some enjoyment out of it. And so I've been really fortunate with the kind of work that Marvel has offered me at this point, is that they've really put me in a good position to do that. And they've been very open to any kind of pop culture DNA splicing experiments that I present to them. They've really been supportive in a really validating way.
I mean, someone who can bring Conan together with Deathlock, that's and make it work really well.
That that was a long time coming, actually, much longer than most people would expect. I had come up years ago with an idea. I was watching. I'm a big Arnold Schwarzenegger fan, and I was watching Conan, and I love the Terminator movies. Those are some of my favorite sci-fi movies. And I said, why would Cyberdyne, why would Skynet make a Terminator who looks like Conan the Barbarian? And I thought about that. I played around in my head, and I was like, what if they basically adopted the skin of the scariest human they had ever faced, and to make it more intimidating towards other humans? And so I thought, oh, what if we did like a Conan versus the Terminator crossover? And so
Yeah.
I wrote an outline for it, just kind of like on a lark, and I was geared up, I was ready to pitch it to Dark Horse. And literally the week I finished it, Marvel announced that they had picked up the rights to Conan the Barbarian. And I was kind of bummed. I was like, all right, I guess I'm gonna have to like file off the serial numbers or something and make this a creator round, or I'll never see this again. And lo and behold, a few years later, I had talked with Tom Brevoort, my editor at Marvel, and I've been talking with him for a few years. Every time I had a new book out, I'd send it to him. And Scouts Honor, I think, was the thing that kind of like was the critical mass for me getting into Marvel. And he hit me up and he said, "Hey, we might have a potential Marvel project for you." Didn't tell me what it was. He's like, "You got to fill out this form. Basically, like, if we're coming up with a similar idea to what you pitch us, like, you can't sue us over that," which is standard operating. It's fine. So I fill out the form and I'm so excited. I'm like, oh man, maybe it's like an anthology story, or if I'm really lucky, like maybe it's a one shot, or dare I, I believe that it's a miniseries. And Tom goes, "So we're looking to relaunch Savage Avengers, and we wanted to see if you had any ideas." And I kind of felt my soul leave my body, because I had never really thought much about Conan, and I didn't really know what to do. And then I said, "Wait, I do have one idea with Conan."
Hmm. Hmm.
I said, "What if we did Conan versus the Terminator? But since Marvel obviously doesn't have the rights to the Terminator, we'll do Deathlock." It's sort of this cyborg hunter from the future. It works perfectly. And I did not realize this at the time, but Tom was one of the original editors of uh, Deathlock. And so I believe he's got a soft spot for the character. And so it did not take a lot of convincing for him to sign off on that. And yeah, then we were kind of off to the races. I think it took us a little while in terms of just negotiating which characters we were going to use, just because a project like that, you really, especially in Avengers type of title, you're really reaching out a bunch of different across a bunch of different offices. So you have to talk to, say, the Venom office to see which symbiote characters available. You have to talk to the X-Men office to figure out like which characters with claws are available, and are there anybody doing anything similar. We talked to, I mean, the Venom office is the Daredevil office, but we talked to the Daredevil office to be like, what's Elektra's deal? Is she going to be Daredevil long term? Can we use her? Things like that. And so it was a negotiation. There's a little bit of back and forth. Um, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. And so thank you for the kind words. I couldn't have asked for a better first book in Marvel. And to be honest, I feel like that I'm going to be like chasing that bar for a long time. I think I love writing team books. I'm not currently writing anything team related right now over there. I'm doing a lot of stuff with single characters, and I always feel a little jealous. I'm like, oh, I love team books. I feel like I'm built for them. And so every time I finish a project, I always kind of nudge Tom, and I nudge Ricky Purden, the talent scout over there, and I'm like, anything that's team related, let
Nice,
me
nice.
know. I'll gladly throw my hat in the ring.
Even navigating the strands of the multiverse with the different
Yeah.
options.
Oh,
Yeah.
please. I would love to. I would have written 100 issues of Savage Avengers. I had pitched that as a 10 issue kind of mega arc.
Mhm.
And so I'm very happy that that's what we got. But I love those characters. I could have and would have written them forever. Um, but I always am a big believer that I would rather leave people wanting more than overstay
Mhm.
my welcome. And I feel like we really kind of hit that sweet spot nicely with 10 issues.
And you have a good, from what I know of you, you've spent your time as a comics cultivator, comics reviewer for 8
Yeah, for
years. Is that
Newsarama.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was at Newsarama for over a decade.
Oh,
I
okay.
got my
Over a decade.
start in the industry as an intern at DC Comics. I worked on like Final Crisis and Batman RIP, Green Lantern Secret Origins, even some very early pages of Greg Rucka and J.H. Wins's Batwoman.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
that was a long time in the making. And that was the summer of '08, which, for those of you keeping score at home, that was also the year that the recession like decimated the economy.
Mhm.
So there were no jobs to be had. I actually wound up taking a day job as a newspaper reporter in Western Massachusetts after my internship wrapped, because that was sort of the job I could get with my skill set. But I was really fortunate that I overlapped with Janelle Asselin, who she was the new assistant editor at the Batman books at the time, working with Mike Martz, who is now head editor over at Bad Cave Studios. And she was an alumni at Newsarama. And so I had asked her, I said, how did you get your start? How did you get from point A to point B? And so she was kind enough to introduce me to Troy Brownfield, who was the reviews editor at Newsarama at the time, and still a mentor and one of my best friends. I mean, we talk multiple times a week. I mean, we're 15 years in, we're still very tight. Um, and yeah, I kind of became Troy's gopher at first. I was writing a lot of reviews. Um, when blog at when there was a membership, a writer change over there, is my first like month at Newsarama. I wound up writing something like 90% of the blog for like a year and a half. And it was a great learning curve. Between DC and Newsarama, it was really like comic book boot camp. I got to kind of learn the lay of the land a bit, but also I had to really kind of figure out, like, what do I like? What don't I like? You have to really articulate that. In a review, something I always said once I took over as the reviews editors, show your work. It is totally cool for you not to like something. I totally get it. The two things that I always really appreciate is when you explain why you
Yeah.
don't like it,
Yeah.
and hopefully that is something that is in good faith and rooted in some kind of critical expertise. Because there are some people who they're very confident in their takes and they're just wrong takes, and you try to avoid that as best you can. Um, and you also try to not be a jerk about it.
Right.
I
Right.
think, I think anybody on the internet probably knows that, like, it's a coarsening of the discourse, and that people, especially dealing with creators, I think there's sort of a distortion view of what we're like. I still see myself, I still catch myself, I still oftentimes identify more as a reviewer than as a creator. And I haven't written reviews in 3 years at this point, and I still kind of identify that way. But there are a lot of people out there who don't know me, who don't know that I was a reviewer for that long, who they think I'm living kind of high on the hog.
Right.
Whereas I still see myself at best as sort of the freshman at Marvel. Um, and so there are a lot of people who they will kind of take their shots, not thinking that, like, oh, hey, this is a human being we're talking about.
Right. Right.
And that's part of the business. Like, that's not something that I begrudge. I recognize how privileged I am, and how lucky I am and how fortunate I am to be where I am and doing the job that I'm doing. But like, it, I'd be lying if I didn't say, like, oh, that's not like a bummer. I and so yeah, I think that's sort of my weird origin story. Was I spent so much time in the review trenches, and I kind of hit a wall where there was a, I think maybe you feel this way as well. I'm sure most comics fans feel this way, is that it kind of comes in waves, where you start liking a whole bunch of stuff, you're really into it, and then it kind of recedes, and you start liking
Mm.
less and less, less and less. And then you're kind of, you have those lean years, or those lean months where you're like, oh, those lean weeks, where you're kind of like, all right, maybe there's a comic that I'm really excited about that reminds me why I'm still in this. It's like being a Mets fan. Um, and
Yeah.
I felt that way as a reviewer, and I was kind of hitting kind of a nasty slump. I want to say this was 2014, 2015. Um, and I said to myself, I need to make a change. I need to change what I'm doing. I need to change my relationship with comics, or I need to walk away. And after Life with Archie had just come out, and I remember being so blown away by how that book surprised me. I had no real affection towards Archie. I'd read, the comics, of course, and you see them in the grocery store, the digest. But seeing what you could do with those characters that you thought you'd seen everything from,
Mm.
I said, okay, that's the kind of stuff I want to. Those are the stories I want to write. And that turned into a first issue script of Spencer and Locke, which turned into an outline for the rest of the arc, which turned into me kind of just hiring an artist for a few pages just on a lark, which led to me pitching it on a lark. And suddenly, an editor emailed and said, "How soon can you get this book finished?" And that's when, like, I dipped my toe in the pool enough that I fell into the deep end.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, so that was kind of my zigzag story into the comics industry. My first book, people seemed to respond to for Spencer and Locke, and um, I said maybe I should just keep doing this, and so I
Yeah.
have, and it's been a really a wonderful time.
And zigzag stories are the best. I love that origin story. I love
Thank
the
you.
Yeah, I love that because I mean, it sounds like so many things were just there, and I mean, the ideas and the way you were able to use it with Savage Avengers and all of those pieces. I love that story.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, and also going to give some love. You mentioned Scouts Honor a little while ago,
Yeah.
so going to give some love to that world building as well, as far as thinking about alternative worlds and futures
Yeah.
and those kind of things.
So that was a really interesting experience, Scouts Honor. I had pitched Aftershock because of Mike Martz, who I interned for him when I was at DC. He was the Batman editor at the time, and when he went on to found Aftershock, that was like a big endorsement for me. Martz is somebody who I've respected for a long time. I've known him. It's going to be like 15 years, like this month, I think. I've known him for a very long time, and so I really wanted to get something. I really wanted to work with him on a project, and it took like a full court press of people. There's Lee Kramer. I had lunch with him, and I kind of got to know him a little bit, and Steve Rotterdam, their head of marketing. I knew him from his time at DC, and Mike. Sort of all three of them kind of coming together really kind of pushed me over the finish line for that series. And it was such an interesting pitch process for that book, because it was unlike any pitch I have done before or since, which was um, usually I come up with a project like Spencer and Locke going to the chapel, or the OZ. I will kind of come up with I'm committed to this idea. I come up with a full outline. I bring a team together and I get some pages together and I pitch that team and I pitch that project and pitch those. Aftershock was different. Aftershock, I had sent them a bunch of pitches that were fully fleshed, and it's too, we really would like to be a little bit more hands-on, with the development. We'd really like to be a little more present for it. So what they asked me to do is they asked me to send a bunch of log lines of ideas that I maybe could develop for them. And it's a little, not many publishers work like that. I believe Boom does stuff like that on occasion. Aftershock, I don't think Vault or IDW or Dark Horse do, but I could be wrong. I've not done work with them. Um, but I came up with like a whole laundry list of ideas. I think I sent them 10 log lines. And of course, the one that I had just come up with like a day or two prior was Scouts Honor. And I thought to myself, what's the weirdest thing that could be used as a Bible? You know, and thinking about that, like, you know, not just a Bible, but something like a foundational text that you build your society on, you know, like the Constitution. And I remember coming down to, it was between a Boy Scout manual and a Dungeons and Dragons manual. And I figured I figured a Boy Scout manual like actually kind of fit for like a post-apocalyptic kind of setting. I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of things like Fallout. Fallout's like my favorite video game, to the point where like I can't play it anymore because I won't write scripts if I do. Um, and so of course that was the one I had done very little research on, very little development, and clearly Aftershock must have known, because they were like, "Yeah, let's develop that one." And so, you know, I took a few weeks, and I came up with an outline. And I was kind of thinking, oh, you know, like Mad Max meets the Hunger Games, you know, about this post-apocalyptic society that has taken an old Boy Scout manual and sort of built their whole society around it, and sort of they don't really remember what real history looks like. It's all been filtered through this game of telephone. And I was really excited that Aftershock went for it. It was just a little, you know, it was weird when I started. I'd written the first issue, I had done the outline, you know, I kind of gave it to them for review. And I signed my contract the same day that Emerald City Comic Con shut down for COVID.
Oh, wow.
And so writing a post-apocalyptic series like at the outset of a global pandemic that has now continued for 3 years was a weird experience. And I think in a way, almost my coping mechanism for
Yeah,
like
yeah.
watching like society just like cave in on itself, in a way that I had not really witnessed since, I mean, I guess you could say the 2016 election, but even the '08 recession.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
and at the same time, it wound up kind of being a surprising examination of like gender roles and spirituality. I think that was kind of the interesting thing for me. Is I was raised Jewish, and I, I guess I'm religious to some extent, but I consider myself maybe more of a spiritual person. You know, I think that game of history being a game of telephone, I
Mm.
think that comes from me being Jewish. But I think ultimately, and I think this is what makes me such a true believer in the realm of comics, is it's ultimately it's just about, what do you believe in that's bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, for me, it's comics, and it's not just, you know, Marvel and DC, but I think it's comics as an industry, sort of as an existential. How do we survive the next, you know, 30 years, 60 years, 100 years, whatever. But yeah, Scouts Honor, you know, it's just there was so much iconography from the Boy Scouts that it was there was a lot of imagery we could use, and
Yeah.
that really populated the world in kind of an almost effortless kind of way. There's so much stuff that there's a lot that I couldn't even fit in 5 issues, but it made this journey of one acolyte figuring out the truth behind this fraud of a cult.
Mm.
It gave me a lot of wiggle room to work within, and just, you know, I think it really tied itself up nicely in terms of how do you separate kind of the tarnished elements of any religious organization with like what's the positive that you can bring from believing in something bigger than yourself. So yeah,
Love
the
it.
book meant a lot to me, and that's the thing that got me in the door at Marvel, so I'll always be grateful for it.
Definitely. I know when I see the name David Pepose on the cover of a book, I'm in for something interesting. I'm in for some good concepts, some good work, and I appreciate all that you bring to the comics page. I know you have Moon Knight coming up. Any other coming projects that you'd like
Yeah,
to mention?
a few things. I've got a Hulk annual coming out in May. I actually have a backup story in Carnage Reigns Alpha that will be out tomorrow. It'll probably be out by the time this
And
thing's
that
being
looks
done.
really good.
Um, I have a story in Darth Vader, Black, White, and Red, as well as I'm doing an ongoing weekly story arc in Avengers Unlimited called Casino Andromeda. So it's the Avengers with teaming up with the Guardians of the Galaxy. And then yeah, Moon Knight is coming out in starting in July. Moon Knight City of the Dead. So pick that up along with Moon Knight number 25 by Jed McKay. And yeah, a few more things are coming that we haven't quite announced yet, but stay tuned. I believe somewhere in the summer, mid to late summer, you'll be hearing what I've got next coming down the pike.
Fantastic, fantastic things. Well, thank you so much for talking with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
And yeah, be glad to have you on at some point, and we'll definitely be checking out Moon Knight and all of the other things. It sounds like you stay really busy.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. And thanks for your support.
Absolutely. Thanks.